Okay, so we're back. And you'll be happy to know that my cat has joined us now. There he is. He's Theodore. So I hope to meet all your pets soon. I feel like pets love this pandemic because we're all home and cuddling with them all the time. All right, so what I'm realizing upon rereading this document is a lot of the comma splices in part two that I was just talking you through could be resolved and perhaps should be resolved by not by adding a fanboy or a coordinating conjunction, but by just separating the sentences fully with a period. And I think this might be happening because y'all are typing your papers on your phones, which I understand, but it means that you're just typing really quickly and you're forgetting some of the basic principles. So that's why you have to go back, read aloud, revise, and you will notice when you read aloud when there's a full sentence that should be followed by a period, not a comma. So, for example, in this next example here, or maybe the sonnet starts with a request, come live with me and be my love, it should be. Okay, so also be very careful that you're actually typing out exactly what the quotations are saying. I think there's a little bit of carelessness here. Not life, love. And then if you read it, you're like, oh, this is the end of the sentence. We can find this sentence more than once in this short poem. That's a perfectly good sentence to follow. Or in this next example here, he is using imagery here to portray a visual representation of what exactly he is describing. He is enticing her, of what he will also physically do for her and what nature will do for them. Those are two great sentences, not just one. And I don't really think that adding like a fanboy or a coordinating conjunction makes the most sense. I think just read it aloud, revise, and be able to identify your independent clauses that have main verbs and main subjects. So again, he is the subject, is the verb, very simple. And so you can't just kind of splice them together with a comma. Oh, and this is a good example in this student passage here of a dropped quotation. So you can see we have, after what has now become two sentences, you have a full sentence that is just a quote, and I will make the bed of roses and 1,000 fragrant posies. And so good job to the student for including the line numbers. Everything is okay. It's just that it's kind of hanging out there on its own, and you need to embrace it with your own discussion, your own analysis. And show that you're in control. That's what quotation integration really means. And this is a great example of a time when you can just very easily use the colon to set it up. So semicolon means you have to have an independent clause on each side. So it functions like a period, except in the case of very long lists when you don't have to have an independent clause. But anyway, for the purposes of this discussion, semicolon, you have to have an independent clause on each side. A colon like this, and I remember Brittany, you were saying, students were saying that, you don't know what all the punctuation means or does. So here you're expanding your punctuation vocabulary. The colon is a punctuation mark that basically says, look, like it's pointing to what's to come, which is to say you don't need to have, it's not equally balanced between both sides, which semicolons kind of have that sort of equality between what comes before the semicolon and one comes after. A colon is like, hey, what I'm about to show to you is actually more important than what came before, and there aren't the same rules about it needing to be a full independent clause. Does that make sense? Can you say that to yourself? It's like saying, look at this. You don't need to, or write it down or whatever. You don't need to have independent clauses on both sides of the colon, and you can use colons to set up quotation marks or long lists. And those long lists could be separated by semicolons, the items within. This stanza made me feel that he really wants her forever, but in a more traditional way, like marriage. There needs to be a little bit of work here, but maybe you can add another colon. Okay, so we're reading aloud. We're quarantined in our homes. We're going to be doing a lot of talking to ourselves. And I'm going to say it a million times, you need to read your writing aloud as well. So this beautiful passage, I thought the student did a great job in part 3 here However, there's something wrong with it that you can very easily identify if you read aloud. So I'll read it for you. I wish I could get one of you to read it for me, but here you are, stuck with my voice. Love is a feeling that cannot be obtained. A feeling compassionately strong towards the person you love dearly is something that breaks free like fireworks up in the sky with that exploding feeling in your heart. The writer makes use of metaphors expressing the love Astrophil feels for Stella is stronger than eliminating any possibilities he has with whom he loves. So that kind of sounds like a Claudia Rankine poem, which is to say, it's a little, there's beautiful imagery. It sounds like a poem. It's a little rambling. This is what is known as two sentences in a row that are mixed constructions, which it means exactly what it sounds like. The grammatical construction of the sentence is kind of mixed up and confused. So I think it's the clearest in this second sentence. The writer makes use of metaphors expressing the love Astrophil feels for Stella. Well, that's one sentence, and the main subject is writer. The main verb is makes use of, and then it sort of like morphs into another sentence here. So what exactly is the subject of is? The writer makes use of metaphors expressing the love Astrophil. I think the student sort of got confused, and then you could end the sentence here. Watch this. You could say, the love Astrophil feels for Stella is stronger than eliminating any possibilities he has with whom he loves. I think that makes a little more sense. So what I'm saying is, like if it were just like this would make more sense because the subject would be the love Astrophil feels for Stella, but we have this clause first. So the student started typing one sentence and it kind of like morphed into a different sentence, and we no longer have a very clear main subject, main verb, or independent clause. So it's like a Frankenstein sentence, like a bunch of things thrown together. So mixed constructions are like Frankenstein sentences. I don't know if you're familiar with Frankenstein or if you read it in high school. Of course, we should be saying Frankenstein's monster because Frankenstein is the doctor, not the monster, but we'll leave that aside for now. Okay, mixed constructions, many sentences kind of like rolled into one sentence. This is along the same lines. Why the following sentence? Why do these contain fragments, or where are the sentence fragments? Again, read aloud. In lines composed a few lines above. Okay, you don't really have to include all that. By William Wordsworth, we can see how Wordsworth uses repetition, imagery, and point of view throughout his poem. Where he is able to demonstrate the critical connection between humans and their exposure to nature at different stages of their life. So can you tell me which of these two sentences is a fragment? I hope you all just said the second one, because this is all fine. The subject is actually we, verb is can see, and the objects are, he uses repetition, imagery, and point of view, which actually I mentioned in class is not the best topic sentence, but that's okay. Here, what is the main subject? He, and the main verb is able. So if we took this where out, he is able to demonstrate the critical connection between humans and their exposure to nature at different stages of their life. That makes sense. That's a perfectly grammatical sentence. But adding in this where makes it sound like a dependent clause, not an independent clause, which is to say it's almost like dependent on what came before. So it might make sense if you combine those two sentences together, and then this is modifying the previous. But if you have it on its own, it's causing a fragment, just because dependent clauses can't be full sentences. Definitionally, they are independent clauses, or they are not independent clauses. So maybe we'll just take out that word. It's very simple. This, I remember this student had a lot of these in the paper, him feeling inspired in writing his own sonnets by studying other poets and their writings. So what's the problem with this? Why is it a fragment? Well, him feeling turns this into, again, a dependent clause. It's like modifying something else. It's serving as an object. So we would want to change it to he feels inspired. Because if you said, okay, how do I say this? What I want to just sum up here is that a sentence might be a fragment if there is no subject, no clear grammatical subject, no main verb, or the sentence functions as a dependent or a subordinate clause. These are the same things, right? Dependent and subordinate. You have subordinate at work. That means someone is below you on the food chain, and so they're dependent on you. I usually say dependent, just want to make. So again, if you read it aloud, you should be able to learn to identify this. But the first step is maybe beginning to underline, like, what's the main subject? What's the main verb? And if you have other modifying words around that, you might realize that it's a dependent clause. Okay, finally, and this is funny because literally the screen videos can't be longer than 15 minutes. So thank you so much for hanging in here. Ending on a positive note, I thought this paragraph was really excellent. Great paragraph, great internal textual development with evidence. And here's where I'm going to introduce a concept to you where your paragraphs in your paper should have deductive, not inductive structure. And maybe we don't have enough time to like fully explain what this means right now, but a paragraph will have deductive structure if you state very clearly what you're going to argue at the top. And I can't actually highlight this because it's just a screen. Yeah, I can't actually type in this passage because it's just a screen grab from Turnitin. Because I can't cut and paste. But in the first sentence or the first couple sentences should be a topic sentence for the rest of the paragraph. They should be the clearest statement of what you're claiming in that paragraph. The topic sentence should not appear at the bottom. Sometimes when we're typing or we're thinking through things, you actually don't arrive at what you're trying to argue until the end of the paragraph or even the end of the whole paper. And that's actually perfectly perfectly reasonable. In fact, that's how I do it. I don't always set out knowing exactly what my main claim is going to be until after I've written a draft, and then I'm like, oh man, like I got there by the end. So that's why revision is absolutely necessary to kind of switch it if that has happened, so that your topic sentences at the top of paragraphs and your main claim at the top of your paper give the reader the clear sense of what you're trying to argue. And that is what's known as deductive structure. So you present your argument first and then you back it up. Inductive structure is when you slowly move into your argument, and generally academic papers are not supposed to be written that way. So deductive, and if you took my 101 class, you know this, we kind of like hammered it into your heads 1,000 times. Deductive, so is your main claim comes first, then you break down your argument. Inductive is main claim appears at end. So you've maybe argument moves toward main claim, which appears at end. So I might not even have time to read this whole paragraph. The first reason Donne gives is that the people death kills don't actually die. For those whom thou thinkst thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, no, nor yet canst thou kill me. That's actually a dropped quotation. It should have a little more punctuation around it. But anyway, not the point. With this statement, we can assume that Donne must have believed in some form of afterlife. This means that even when death kills us, we wake up in the afterlife and are no longer dead. The second reason Donne gives for not fearing death is that death is just a prolonged slumber. Okay, so I'm going to leave you to read this on your own and think about how nicely the paragraph gives first reason, second reason, third reason for the claim that has been presented. Actually, maybe it was presented sort of before. It just says great organization and then leaves the reader on a catchy note at the end. Thank you for listening. We're out of time. You guys are awesome.